Over the past couple of days, the NHL has been investigating and reviewing a trade and trying to go through at the NHL Central Registry right before the deadline on Monday between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Anaheim Ducks. We now know this trade has been canceled and voided, but what went wrong? Who's to blame? And what happens next? We'll discuss that coming up next. Well, welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As we mentioned, we have some more breaking news from the NHL. The trade sending Evgeni Dadonov from Vegas Golden Knights to the Anaheim Ducks has been officially canceled and voided by the NHL. Now, on Tuesday, after the NHL Trade Deadline, we had put out a video talking about the news that the NHL was investigating this trade and it was kind of in limbo, and this could possibly be a scenario that we see unfold here once an investigation was complete. So here's a quick backstory in case you don't know or don't really understand exactly everything that's going on. Of course, Evgeni Dadonov was a member of the Florida Panthers for a while, became an unrestricted free agent, a contract for 3 years as an unrestricted free agent with the Ottawa Senators, and as part of that contract, he was given a modified no-trade clause with 10 teams that he could block an NHL trade to. Of course, the conditions of that was that by July 1st of each year, he had to submit his 10 teams updated list each year that he was not going to approve a trade to. Well, after the first season, things didn't go overly well in Ottawa. The Senators didn't see him as really being as great of a fit as they had hoped he would be, and they decided to trade the player. So they completed a trade with the Vegas Golden Knights, acquiring defenseman Nick Holden in return. Now, how things work, because a lot of it in the other video, we really didn't know the back end of things. How does it all work from the back office perspective, you could say, when it comes to the paperwork side of this business and everything. So essentially what happens is when an NHL trade is being completed, each team would have a representative on the phone and on a trade call with the league's Central Registry office. The Central Registry office, which are known for being extremely thorough, according to many NHL reporters, basically review the full details of the trade, and they make sure that each team is cap compliant and that there's no reason, essentially, that the deal should not be allowed to happen. To make sure all rules are being followed, everything of that nature, and the deal is either approved or it's denied before the end of the call. Now, originally, this trade between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Anaheim Ducks was rubber stamped approved by NHL Central Registry, and it made it in before the cutoff, which is why a lot of people are so shocked and surprised. How did a trade get approved and then later voided and canceled? That's the confusing part. Well, what happened was after the trade, once he was notified of the deal, Evgeni Dadonov is like, well, what do you mean I was traded to the Anaheim Ducks? I have a modified no-trade clause, and they're on my list of teams that I'm blocking, so you can't do that. So again, how did this happen? Here's what we've heard. Here's what we know. Hard to say 100% what is true. The NHL put out a statement, which I'll show you here, just confirming it's a pretty bland statement that upon investigation, that they determined that the modified no-trade clause was in effect. The Ducks were blocked. The trade should not have been allowed to happen, and it's been canceled. That's really all they've said. They're not going to probably come out publicly, at least it doesn't appear like so, and kind of explain why things happened and how it ended up approved and later returned. Now, I've seen many NHL reporters and insiders saying that they've heard everybody saying that this is all the Ottawa Senators' fault. Well, you might ask yourself, how and why is this the fault of the Ottawa Senators, who Dadonov has not played for in a year, is not signing his paychecks, does not hold his contract? How is this their issue? Well, I've heard Elliot Friedman on a 32 Thoughts podcast that came out this morning, and I've heard other reporters talking about it throughout the day, saying essentially what they're hearing is that on that trade call that would have taken place between the Ottawa Senators, the Vegas Golden Knights, and NHL Central Registry last July, on the July 28th, when that trade was taking place, that at the time, of course, that's something that always comes up. Is there any no trade protection blocking this deal? The answer would have been no. The Senators would have said, or at least they should have said, that we have his list of teams that is he's blocking. The Vegas Golden Knights are not on this list. Now, of course, all the lists for players under no trade clause are not housed at Central Registry. They do not have a copy. As of today, that is a team-centric issue. So all teams that for all their contracts are required to have their own list for players that they have these clauses in their contracts. They're then able to present those lists to kind of validate their claim when making a trade, but it's not housed at Central Registry. Apparently the reason for that, which kind of makes sense, is a lot of player agents in the PA and a lot of people are against that idea, because the more people that have access to this data, the more likely something is going to leak out, and they don't want players' no trade clauses being leaked out because of the reaction you'd get from fans. Can you imagine if some star athlete had a no trade clause and they had like New York, Toronto, all the teams in California? Well, they'd probably get a lot of hate from those fan bases, right? And it's something that you want to be kept private. You have your own reasons for doing it. A lot of it involves money. Some of it involves lifestyle. They all have their reasons for doing it, and it's really none of our business, and I understand why they do that. However, because of this mix-up and screw-up here, I would not be surprised if they try to create some sort of confidential method here of keeping that stuff in one place so that Central Registry has access to it upon each trade, and that this won't happen again if indeed it's the case. So essentially what Vegas is trying to say, and what the Friedman and everybody else, is that during that trade call, that the Senators led them to believe that the no trade clause was no longer in effect, is what they're saying. So it leads you to think that he did not file his paperwork with his list on time or something to that effect. That's what a lot of people seem to think was happening here. So the NHL Central Registry is saying, well, he no longer has any trade protection. There's nothing to worry about here. Approve the trade. And then Vegas, the whole time they've had him, have assumed that he's had zero trade protection in his contract because it was voided. That's what some people believe out there, which to me seems really, really weird in my opinion. I'm not sure if that... Now, there's always the possibility that it could be a misunderstanding, I guess. That does happen. But at the same time, I mean, it doesn't make sense to me how a team, I don't care who you are, you don't know what your players that you're signing the checks for, what they have for clauses in their contracts. How do you not know? It doesn't make sense. And again, like I said, if the Vegas Golden Knights were being decent about any of their trades, because they've been treating people at this organization and things have been changing. Look what they did to Marc-Andre Fleury. Again, they completed a trade. The player doesn't even get the benefit of a phone call beforehand to give a heads up or nothing. If they would have called his agent and be like, hey, we're trading your guy to Anaheim, which happens a lot, common courtesy in the NHL, he'd be like, oh, what do you mean? He's got a modified no trade. You might want to check that. Be like, oh, what do you mean? Now, the other thing is that some people will say that even if that conversation did happen, let's say Vegas called Dadonov's agent or the player himself and said, hey, heads up, you're getting dealt, or your player's getting dealt, they would have said, whatever, and he'd be like, oh, well, we're under the impression that trade protection has been voided, so we're going ahead with the deal. So even if they were given a common courtesy phone call, that maybe Vegas went ahead and did it anyway because they were under the impression that it was null and void. So I guess we'll never really know the full answer to that, but to me, that just shows poor management in my opinion. Like, you know what? Did Ottawa mislead them? I don't know why they would. Like, what benefit would Ottawa get from that? Clearly, Vegas was not on his list. He had no problem going there. So what benefit would the Senators get out of misleading them to think that the no trade protection was no longer in effect? Zero. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Are there people that work for the Senators that are inept and appear to do some dumb shit sometimes? Absolutely. Look at who the owner is. I'm a Senators fan myself, and they are extremely frustrating at times. Look at the things that we've seen that organization do. They are famous for creating headlines that are nonsensical, but I don't see how they could possibly benefit from this. There's none. And again, like I said about the Vegas Golden Knights, how they're managing their players, and just, I don't know. To me, like, how do you not know this? I don't understand how this does not fall on Vegas. But at the end of the day, it does fall on Vegas right now. Dadonov is being welcomed back. To look at how awkward that's going to be. Vegas put out a statement saying, we're welcoming back Evgeni Dadonov. He's expected to play for us tomorrow night. Geez, welcome back, Evgeni. Like, yeah, let's go play a hockey game. Can you imagine what that's going to be like in the dressing room? Like, how freaking awkward is that going to be? That's ridiculous. Now, I'm sure he doesn't want to be there anymore because he's going to feel like they don't want him. Like, holy jumping. This is just such an ugly, ugly mess. Now, of course, here's the other part of this that we could see happen. Now, don't be surprised if Evgeni Dadonov is still traded. And yes, this can happen. As I've said before in the other video, the NHL Trade Deadline, it does exist for a reason. It means that if anything happens after that deadline, they're not eligible to play. Now, can players still be traded past the deadline? Yes, they can. Can they continue playing that current season, though? No, they cannot. They cannot play anymore in the regular season or in the playoffs. I know a lot of people were under the impression that it was only playoff rosters that were impacted. That is not the case. I believe it was that way once upon a time, but that's been that way for some time. So at the end of the day here, if they trade Dadonov, his season becomes over, essentially. Now, if you look around the NHL, there's a handful of teams that have the cap space to take some players from Vegas, and they're probably sitting back right now just licking their chops going, you got some players and prospects that we like, and if you want to hand them over for basically nothing, we'll gladly help you out here. Look at the Arizona Coyotes, who have been trying to pick up players with term because they are probably concerned they're going to have a difficult time attracting players to their team because of the whole arena situation. So they want players under contract, and they're getting them by trade. There's obviously less to worry about. So they have the space to take on Dadonov, but they're going to want something else too. You expect them to say, give me a first-round pick, give me a high-prize prospect, give me something else that you really like as well. Now, if that happens, which can happen, it's fully allowed, then Evgeni Dadonov, his season's over. So essentially, he's going to get paid by the Coyotes to not play the rest of the year, and he can pick up next year. His season will come to an abrupt end a little bit earlier than he was anticipating. Now, of course, the Vegas Golden Knights, basically their roster is kind of frozen right now because they have like Mark Stone, Alec Martinez on LTIR. It's believed that Martinez is about ready to come back, which is what they're trying to clear some room for here. Stone, I'm not sure about him, but they need to try to get themselves into the playoffs, right? Like, they're far from guaranteed a playoff spot, and in fact, they're in danger of missing, if anything. And if they can't get some of these guys back, they're going to have a heck of a time even getting into the playoffs. Like, this is not the same Golden Knights team because of all the injuries and everything. Like, they're in rough shape, and this is going to have major impacts. And think about how much money they'll lose if they don't make the playoffs. Even a few extra playoff games in their own building is going to generate millions of dollars, which is big for the owners. So certainly not a situation you want to see. Plus, we know how much Bill Foley wants to bring a Stanley Cup to Vegas. I'm sure he is fuming over this and, trying to figure out who's to blame. Is it because, if somebody in Vegas is really to blame, I won't be surprised if somebody gets fired over it, to be honest, because they're pretty shrewd and ruthless there, and they want to win at all costs, which I do understand. But you look around other teams like, Ottawa. I know they probably don't want to deal with Ottawa if they're blaming them, but like Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo, there's, a few other teams that have the cap space right now that could take a player on and basically put them in the cupboard for next year. And Vegas might not have any choice but to do that. But at the end of the day, were they not going to have to do something to this effect anyways? I mean, I don't know how far above the cap with all these contracts. They picked up Jack Eichel making $10 million, which is essentially no cap space, and didn't have to activate, or was able to activate him, without trading a bunch of money off the books because Mark Stone's back was hurt and he ended up going on LTIR. This team is spending a ridiculous amount of money, and they're going to have no choice here at some point to move a few players. And to me, the way this season is going, like, the playoffs are not a guarantee. They may not have a choice here, but to move on from one or two players, I mean, if they can get themselves in the playoffs and to the playoffs, then there's no more cap. Like, so if like Mark Stone, for example, is going to be really tough to bring back. If they move him, move Dadonov, and they can get Martinez in, if they get him in the playoffs, then Stone, they can get anybody back at that point. Not a big deal. I'm sure you all remember Tampa from last year and the whole debacle about how far over the cap they were with LTIR and Kucherov coming back on day one, that whole shenanigans, whatever. But still, at the end of the day, this is a big mess, and there's a lot of money on the line here. And there's a lot of awkwardness, and I do think we're going to see some NHL changes come from this with how these things are administered. Like, it's an administrative mess / nightmare, and it's not something you see. Like, I mean, thankfully on the Anaheim side of things, like, you imagine if the Anaheim Ducks were trying to acquire a player and go for a playoff run, like, they'd be they'd be really in a mess right now too, right? And instead, in Vegas's case, they're trying to shed money to bring back other money off of LTIR to get into the playoffs. So there's still a team impacted here in their playoff race, but it normally would have been a little bit different. But like, imagine if the Claude Giroux to Florida deal suddenly get voided all of a sudden. Like, that would be a huge mess right now. And Florida would be like, Anyway, so clearly somebody's to blame. I don't understand how it could not be Vegas. Could there be something from the Ottawa side of things? Maybe, but considering how long he's been a member of the Golden Knights organization, I see a lot of people blaming Ottawa, and I see a lot of people giving Vegas a pass on this, and I don't get it. I don't understand how you could not understand the contracts of your own players and know what's what. And you got to remember something else here too. The way they've treated people, the things that they've done, it just seems you no longer get the benefit of the doubt once you've kind of created a reputation for yourself. And to me, that's kind of where we're at. That's why I'm more inclined to think Vegas is at fault here. And really, like, desperate people do desperate things. The Golden Knights are desperate to get into the playoffs. They know the owner is, wanting to win at all costs here, and they're trying to force themselves into a solution to be able to get back these players, and it's not working out. So, at the end of the day, Evgeni Dadonov is not gonna play ball here. He's gonna lose money by going to California because of the tax rate difference. So I would suspect a team like Arizona might not be on his no trade clause because of the favorable tax laws there. If that's how he's basing his no trade clause, is strictly on which areas am I going to lose the most money to income tax, which I don't know if that's the case or not. I don't know what's important to him. I don't know him at all. But if that's it, Arizona might not be on there. But if some of the teams with the cap space that could take him are on his list as well, and he won't budge, then they're completely screwed. Completely screwed. And at the end of the day, like I said, it doesn't even matter about where he wants to play or where he's comfortable playing, anything like that. For him, it's his right, and it's also his paycheck. People often think of that. Like, by getting moved around, you can make more or less money, or about the same, depending on where you go from city to city and what the provincial or state tax laws are and the federal laws difference between Canada and the U.S. Like, your paycheck can be altered, and it can be fairly substantial depending on where you go from one place to the next. That's why, like, the states with no state tax have such a major advantage. They can get away with paying players a little bit less because they get a lower salary, but they still end up taking home as much or more than somebody else in a higher tax area. So that's just the way it goes. So anyways, complete mess, but we do know the trade's officially voided. Who's to blame? I think it's Vegas, but a lot of people think it's Ottawa. We may never know exactly. Eventually, somebody might spill the beans, but that's what we know here for now. And don't be surprised if Vegas tries to pull off another trade here to get themselves out of this pickle. They're going to have to pay a pretty penny for it, though, in a matter of time. I don't think this story is over. So we'll update it again when more news comes out on it. Know your thoughts on this really crazy NHL scenario down in the comments. Hard to say if we'll ever see anything like this again, but I would just assume, like I said, changes are coming to the NHL to make sure it doesn't happen again. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.